much more engaging to see all of your faces on the screen. So before I turn this over to the mayor to start us off with an update, I just wanted to, extend appreciation for the county council members joining us this afternoon. Welcome. And I also just wanted to give some brief background. So about 2 years ago now, I guess it was the winter of 2019, early in 2019, right after I had joined council, we were sort of in the middle of similar circumstances with respect to weather and an encampment on the front of City Hall's lawn. And at that time, I recall vividly, we all crammed into the mayor's boardroom. We were having a meeting of the city council, and county council members came to that meeting. And it was really valuable to have everybody at the same table having one conversation. And so I don't know if it's my East Coast upbringing and wanting to be, direct and transparent about things, but I feel like there's great value in having all of us at the same table to have these discussions and determine how best to move forward, especially in areas where there is so much jurisdictional overlap. And so not to say that we will always be in exact agreement moving forward, but just hoping that we're at least open to the conversations that we'll have here today. So just to give some background on what's bringing this forward, and thanking Chair Buchanan for assisting. And so I will act as moderator, but we are co-sponsoring this meeting. And so inviting Chair Buchanan to step in at any time as well. Okay, so with that, we will first have updates from the Mayor of City of Bellingham first, and then followed by an update from County Executive Sadhu. So Mayor Fleetwood, I'll turn it over to you.
You're muted, Seth.
You're muted, Seth.
You're muted at this time.
You'd think after a year of hearing you're muted, we would all not suffer from that one anymore. Thank you. Thank you, Council President Stone. It's a pleasure to see all these faces today. I support your comment, Hannah, about the value of getting together and having a conversation on this issue. Before we dive in, I'd just like to express a few rounds of thanks, certainly to members of the public who've been challenged in accessing city and county services during the encampment. We've heard from you, and we appreciate your ongoing patience. City and county employees have expressed themselves, and certainly there's been disruptions. And we've heard from a variety of folks. I want to thank them as well for their ongoing patience through this. And then, of course, thanks need to go out to the many people who have volunteered and donated and worked to help people who are at the encampment. There have been lots of systems in place and people helping to provide food and clothing and other variety of necessities to people, and they deserve thanks and gratitude as well. And of course, there are many passionate advocates who have expressed themselves to us in the last 8 weeks and before, who have a real zeal, appropriately so, to address this this condition that we have in our nation and here in Bellingham. And so to everyone involved from the various angles, I just want to express thanks for your care and concern. With that, I was asked to give an update. I've expressed some version of this before, most recently before the Homeless Strategies Work Group meeting. Some of you were on that and others were not, but to put us all in the same place, we have had an encampment for 2 months at City Hall. Marcus D corrected me last week. I'd been saying it was on November 11th, but he indicated that people showed up on November 10th. But we're in at the beginning of month 3, just past 2 months. It has grown. It's well known to all of you. Don't know and need to go into details on that, but the position that we've taken at the city as it relates to this has been to acknowledge that there is a need for increased winter sheltering, to indicate that we are actively engaged in the hard work of creating the conditions to justify ending the encampment. The conditions that we've discussed and that we've defined is building increased capacity to house the people in a far more humane way than what they're presently experiencing and enduring on the lawn at City Hall. There have been a number of efforts that have been that have happened this year. As many of you know, there have been efforts for a long time to put online a congregate living space, and we were able to do that this summer in an emergency response to COVID, to find a place that was sufficiently large that we could space out more people than were previously at the drop-in center. So we put online base camp. Of course, people know that through the Unified Command, we've created an isolation quarantine facility at Byron Street that has capacity for 57 people. It's somewhere around half full at the moment, as I understood it most recently. We have made operational just recently an additional site that's been put up at Civic Field at the Frank Jerry parking lot. It's called Swift Haven. It's being operated by Homes Now. We've partnered with the county, who, as the county council members know, authorized the executive to acquire 50 tiny homes. And we're using 25 of them at the Swift Haven site at the Frank Jerry Field. They've been made operational just in recent days. 25 tiny homes, up to 28 people that can live there. We remain in active negotiation and effort to house an additional site with an organization that may be able to serve as an operator to manage and supervise that additional site. The port, through an action several weeks ago, made available a site at Cornwall, and that's a place where we could again partner with the county in providing tiny homes. I had previously indicated a willingness to buy 25 pallet shelters. Again, the challenge is finding the operators to do that, but that's where we're at. The object has been to create increased capacity. We've been successful in doing that. We continue that work. I've communicated frequently with, well, members of council, but Executive Sadhu in identifying next steps. Obviously, the object here has been to increase capacity to get through this winter and then continue the conversations around longer term and what we intend to do to address this problem in an ongoing way. The city has also sponsored a request for qualifications. We've appropriated money in our last budget to house an additional site. More coming on that. That is the site that we hope will go operational at a public Bellingham site in the spring. So there's a lot of effort that's happening and will continue to happen to make progress on this issue. I have indicated, and I understand it's been quite prominent on social media, that the mayor is going to sweep the site on January 31st. It's a loaded term. I've indicated a couple of weeks ago our intention that the encampment will come to an end at the end of this month. And it is our earnest hope and intent to find places for people to go. So, and as I've indicated previously, the intention is to have multiple phases to it. I'm hoping very much to stay engaged with organizers of the encampment to do this in a peaceful way. And it's not just going to be coming in and, a physical dispersal. I'm hoping that we employ a number of steps, including bringing care workers to caseworkers to the site to identify people with whom they've previously worked. I'm hoping that there's going to be a very humane process by which we go about doing that. But that's where we're at presently. That's sort of a broad, high-level overview of where we're at from our perspective.
Thank you, Mayor Fleetwood. I think out of the interest of time and efficiency, probably allowing Executive Sadhu to give an update and then hold our questions related to those updates until both have spoken. If there's any objection or other suggestions, feel free to speak up. If not, just before Executive Sadhu begins, I just wanted to welcome Councilmember Ellen Voss. I see that you've been able to join us this afternoon, so I just want to thank you for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Executive Sadhu for an update.
Hi, good afternoon, council members of both councils. And I was on the webinars link first, so I have been listening to all these things, and then Barry called me, hey, you are on the wrong place. So, sorry. Okay, I just don't want to make it take a lot of your time. I have written down some points I want to share with you as my update. That 24 of the tiny homes have been delivered, and we expect within next week or 10 days at the maximum another 25 will be ready to be delivered, or will be ready if we can deploy them. The other part is the COVID protocols have limited our other usual partners, the faith-based organization, other places which we could normally use in other years. In this year, it made it very difficult to do that. The other thing is that shelter choice has been brought up, and I think that has caused additional difficulty of this choice from people. The other part is that the three major players, they need a little more cooperation, like Base Camp and 210 Camp and Homes Now. They're three organizations, but they could actually coordinate more because if we see that a couple of things have happened, that there's a rumor that people were given to understand that if you go to Base Camp, you may miss out on a tiny home. So to get eligible for tiny home, stay in the encampment. I mean, people take things very differently. And there have been a couple of days, or maybe more than 2 days, when the Base Camp has been full. But otherwise, there have been places there. The Sphere Winter Shelter or warm-up shelter has been available. And they had another 39 places on the walk-in center on Holly Street, which was also available. But somehow it has not been taken advantage of for whatever reasons. We did contact with the Base Camp that there was another issue brought to my notice, that Base Camp is not allowing people back in. And I think that we did reach out to them and say, what is the issue? And the issue was at one time, the COVID was, tests were going high, and they had a couple of people tested in their facility. And in the facility at at the 210 base camp, and we suddenly had 25, 30 people at the Motel 6. And then we said that when you come back, you're welcome to come back to the base camp. So there are several different things which general public may not know. Even as of today, there are a lot of places, spaces 70 plus 39 places open at the base camp and the drop-in center as we speak today. Now, the other thing is that it's frustrating for me that county employees have confronted some of unfortunate incidents, and I believe city employees have also, and we have been really in much constraint for any sweet action. And you guys know that there was an incident at the restrooms on the ground floor just a couple of days ago, and it was reported to police, and then the person had a lot of weapons. Now, I'm not saying that it is because of homelessness or this thing, but these one thing leads to another, and we on Friday, when I got several emails and phone calls, we immediately, I sent a letter to mayor that either the parking meters on the Grand Avenue should be opened up for county employees so they can park close to the office and come in. Or what we did, we went to Bellingham Senior Center and we have arranged a parking lot with them, and we have deployed a shuttle service between Senior Center and our office 3 or 4 times in a day. We will have a shuttle that can bring the employees back and forth. Some of the employees complain that they leave at 5 o'clock and sometimes 6 o'clock. It's dark. And it's not that they have been attacked, but it's the perception that they don't feel safe. And there have been some incidents. So I think that this is causing some of the issues for us. And another thing is that I did talk to the mayor's meeting last week, all the city mayors, that this is not a Bellingham problem. A lot of people think, oh, homelessness, that's Bellingham problem. It's not a Bellingham problem. It's a problem for all of the county and all of the cities. And they have not participated in that manner or demeanor that it is their issue as well. So I challenge them that, you know, we need to work together and find a common solution for whole county. And we can't just put it under the rug. Oh, Bellingham has to deal with this. And I think that we have taken some measure to improve the security. And I know Sheriff's deputy had an issue 3 weeks ago. I'm not blaming that this is because of it, but it leads to certain things which are sometimes very difficult to manage. And I think this is a policy decision. What should we do? There are 2 issues here. One is a short-term issue for 30, 60 days of severe weather. And the second issue is this prolonged long-term issue. What should we do? And I think I am really thankful to Hannah and Barry to organize this thing so that we can all together think through that. What should we do? Homeless Strategies Group has been working. We have done actually much better than 2018. The COVID factor has exacerbated things, and it didn't quite work out. But at the same time, there have been places which have not been taken for one reason or the other. And one of the things, and I did push back on the advocates that they said that if I said that what about vouchers for the motels? They said that's fine, but if you have somebody in the motel, once the voucher expires, you must have a tiny home ready for them. I mean, you know, like there has to be some things reasonable. That until everybody on this site has a tiny home, we are not going to move. I don't know. Like people can take it that I'm heartless, I'm this, I get all kinds of emails, but that's not the point here. This is not about me being heartless. This is about solving a problem. And that is for all the council members of both the councils and the rest of the councils as well. I don't mind people pointing fingers at me, and that's fine. That's the job I took. But at the same time saying, we are not going to move until each and every person who is there gets a tiny home. Maybe it has to relate to that promise made that if you stay on the camp, on this Camp 210, you will get a tiny home. I don't know where that comes from. So I may sound a little frustrated. I am in a matter, and I have, with Mayor Fleetwood, I have attended all the meetings of negotiations and finding a solution. It's been a moving target to find. And I really think that the real solution lies with both the councils here. We are together. Let's find out short-term solution and a long-term solution. Sorry, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Sidhu. On that note, I would open it up to questions and for our executives, but asking, I think, to narrow based on our time and objectives today, to narrow the scope for now on the short term, right? The short term solutions and options, thinking about the current crises related to the pandemic, right? Not knowing how many months, that may still carry out. And then also with respect to severe weather, as Executive Sidhu had referenced. And so I would encourage people, if there are questions for either related to, facts. One of my things is wanting to make sure that we're all working with the same facts and that we get those questions answered, so that then as we're figuring out how best to move forward, we have that solid foundation under us. So I will open that up to questions, whether you are most comfortable just raising your hand in your window. I can see everybody, or if you'd like to use your raise hand icon, either works for me. So Councilmember Hamel and then Councilmember Donovan.
Thank you, Council President. The mayor listed a number of different sites with varying degrees or varying numbers of available units that would come online. I'm just wondering, what is the summary total of those available units that would come online?
Well, if we're able to, we put up basically 25 units at Swift Haven. The Cornwall site, there was an early contention that it would only hold 15, but we've had people look at it. We believe the Cornwall site would hold 20, 25 tiny homes. So that's 50. If we've got the RFQ out and they're going to be able to take advantage of some additional number. Of course, that's this spring. Were there an ability to find and an inclination to support another site with operator and 25 more tiny homes, that would be 75. What we're actively working on at the moment is putting up this second site, which would be a total of 50. Is that helpful?
And the second, both sites have operators. Is that true?
Well, the Swift Haven site, of course, we've entered into formal agreement with Homes Now. There's a license in that site. There's conditions. They've got the tiny homes, the pallets, et cetera. So that's up and operational. The second site that we're working on, we're actively seeking to see if we can formalize an agreement with an operator. We've got the willingness that we've expressed to, between Executive Sidhu and I, to find some money to help potentially a second site with a credentialed professional to help provide social service needs. We've got tiny homes available for that site. We've got, of course, the site itself. So the issue with that one is formalizing an agreement with an operator. We're working to do that actively.
A brief follow-up, I guess, from Councilmember Hamill's question, because it relates to, I mean, if we're looking at capacity, then what the demand is. So Councilmember Frazee had a question related in the chat, just if we have the numbers of those people currently residing, you know, in Camp 210 or at City Hall and on the library lawn.
You know, at one point, a employee in the health department had gone out and just counted tents. And this was several weeks ago now, but she'd counted 141 tents at one point in time. Now, it's our perception that not all of the tents are occupied. Some appear not to be occupied, but the working number that we've been using has been 120 people.
Thank you. Councilmember Donovan and then Councilmember Vargas.
Yeah, and Councilmember Hamill asked half of my questions there. So I'll just ask about the third site. So the third site, which potentially would, I guess, not be available till spring, would be another 25. And would the city, is the city going to buy those 25 pallet shelter homes presently, or would they wait until another RFQ or RFP went out? Does that make sense? Is the purchase going to happen before, or is it dependent on the site being set up and operator found? And just sort of a point of, we aren't allowed to use the chat in our council meetings because of public records issues. I don't know if it's different with you all, but that's just an observation.
So you all know there are a range of options as to what we could do with the tent encampment at City Hall, and I've described them before. We could ignore it and do nothing to a physical dispersal, boom, or we could do something in between. What we chose to do was to identify a standard, which was creating the conditions to justify ending the encampment, and then defining that as increasing capacity in sheltering. And for those that have been actively involved in this effort over the years, despite the frustration expressed by some of the advocates who are wanting things faster, it takes some time. So in that context, we've been able to put some sites online relatively quickly. But the challenge is that building the sites with the operators and getting them housed with tiny homes. So Todd, we've been methodically going about trying to create those conditions and create increased capacity. And so I think the 25 at Swift Haven, 25 potentially more at this second site that we're actively working on. I think what you're getting at is whether or not there could be a third site even, and whether there is going to depend on whether we're able to find a site and yet an additional operator, and that's challenging. There's not a readily available supply of homeless camp operators in Bellingham. I had indicated a willingness to acquire, in addition to the 50 that the county has authorized, an additional 25. There were some savings. I believe staff person can chime in here if I get this detail incorrect, but I believe broadly speaking, this is correct. There was an intention that the city would be spending more on base camp, and I think there was some savings somewhere when the county got more through CARES Act that could go to base camp. And I expressed a willingness to utilize some of that money to buy 25 pallet shelters from the company in Everett. We've prepared a purchase order. We've not formally submitted it simply because to do so before we have an operator and a formal agreement for yet an additional site would be imprudent if we don't have a place to put them. So, but I'm on the record prepared to do so.
So just to confirm and clear out the chat, and Beck had confirmed that there were 102 sites identified as of last week's walkthrough. So again, that was 102. And I have Councilmember Vargas, and then followed by Byrd, Knudsen, and Huffman.
Thank you, Council President. Hello, everybody. Thanks for your time. I'm curious about, you said there are 25 tiny houses right now at Swift Haven. Two-part question. Have 25 people moved into those houses? And have we had a discussion with the people on the lawn whether everyone is willing to move if they get a tiny house?
So to the second part of the question, no, we've not gone out and formally engaged and asked that question. I'm not sure. Yeah, well, it's an interesting proposal, something that can be considered. I'm sorry, Pinky, the first question. Are all of the Swift Haven sites?
Are the 25 houses occupied?
Well, we've got friends that are listening there in Radio Land. 13 units are filled at the moment, and they are working on filling up the additional 12. So my understanding last time I got a report from Homes Now was that they had, their expectation is that at least 80% of the units available at Swift Haven, 24 or 25 will be occupied by people from the tent encampment at City Hall. So that's approximately 20 from City Hall. And last time I'd gotten an update, they were going through some screenings for the remaining number, but those will be filled up soon.
So before going on, I just wanted to confirm that Councilmember Brown from the County Council has been able to join us as well. So welcome, Councilmember Brown. Thank you for being here. And then next we have Councilmember Byrd, followed by Knudsen, Huffman, and Lilliquist.
Thank you. I'd like to get a better understanding of how many people we are trying to assist and what their unique situations are, because I don't know that necessarily a tiny house in itself would help with that, whereas there might be other solutions that would. So for example, are there a number of people out there that we could be, that our new mental health facility might be able to service and that we could move into or use that facility for? So I'd like to suggest that we look into maybe putting up some sort of a table or kiosk or something out, either the council side or in front of City Hall, where people could come up and give us their name and their information, maybe answer a couple questions about their situation and what they're looking for, and whether or not they're looking for a tiny house or another solution, and use that as a means to start quantifying what the need is, as well as how we might best be able to, instead of creating an overarching thing, to try to help everyone and create more targeted solutions based on the need for each of those groups. Is that something that we could set up and facilitate?
We have regular tent encampment staff meetings. I stay in regular contact with Executive Sadhu. That's certainly something that's a conversation point. And if it's deemed as something that for which there's value, something that can be considered.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
Oh, no, Seth, could you maybe walk me through why that might not be useful, or do we already have that information? Or is it just not needed because we're doing something else at this point? No,
that's just my careful self wanting to take your proposal and go back and have a conversation on it rather than winging it in this particular dynamic. You raise an appropriate question. I guess the thought that enters my mind is that Hans Urchinger Davis, Executive Director at Lighthouse Mission, has been on the record multiple times indicating the fact that there's considerable occupancy available at base camp. And he's previously indicated that in just sort of anecdotal impression, based on what they know and their familiarity with the clientele at base camp, that upwards of 60% of the people who are at the tent encampment at City Hall have at one point in the past utilized the services of base camp. And I mention that simply as it relates to your question. There are caseworkers and social workers and people in this community whose professional job is to engage with people who are experiencing homelessness. And so what I would want to do and be inclined to do and expect to do as when we work on ending the encampment, I'd like to have, as part of that process, bringing in caseworkers from various social service agencies and having, whether on a day or over several days, some engagement, an opportunity to re-engage with people that they've previously helped. And so there are people in this community that have knowledge about many of the people at City Hall. So maybe somewhere in all of that, identifying a process by which we get names and identify people could be helpful. I'm not dismissing for a moment, Tyler. I'm open to that. It just requires some refinement and further consideration. So, Paul?
Yeah, I think Tyler has brought up a very good point that in my understanding that the low barrier shelter we have been talking about, and that's exactly what Tyler has brought up, the people who are not able to or who need this kind of help, that next 25 shelters, that's what we were thinking, that at the Cornwall site, that can accommodate 25 people there. And if you look at the majority of the 100 people, maybe 25 of them who are really need that kind of help, and they can be managed. But the short-term solution for severe weather shelter is to occupy all the spots available for warm-up and for food and everything else and other services at the base camp and the drop-in center. So if you combine both, there are more than 100 spots available right today. And if you take 25 out of that for people who really need more immediate services or mental health issues and things, we can find a solution. And Tyler, you're right that we need to separate what level of service for how many people, and then deal with them accordingly.
Thank you. To continue on that, I hear that, and we've talked about this a lot, that there are a lot of services. There's a lot of beds available. Base camp, obviously, based on their data, has not filled up or very infrequently fills up. And yet we still have a number of people that are on the lawn right now. And so I don't know where the disconnect there is between the people that are on the lawn and the availability that we have. And so understanding better for me why they're choosing to be on the lawn, whether it's because they're not aware of the different services, because they're not allowed into those services, because they would prefer just to be on the street and they're not looking for that type of assistance, or because their faith or whatever other situation it might be. It would be helpful to understand where we could help fit them in based on current availability, but also what that expanded availability would need to look like. If it's a bunch of families that are out there, I don't know, but that would be different solution than a tiny house potentially. Whereas at the same time, if it's a number of people that are having a substance abuse issue, then it's probably different than tiny houses as well. Maybe we should be partnering with a substance abuse organization to help facilitate all of this and putting some sort of expanded capabilities at their location. So for me, I'd like to know, because it feels like there's not a lot of information about who the people are or how many people that we're working with and what those situations are. And what I'm hearing from the people that are there is that Lighthouse is offering a great service, but they haven't actually shown up and come over there, and they're not participating. And so I'm not sure how they would know who's there or what those people's issues are, or if they've been to Lighthouse before, if they haven't actually come and talked to those individuals and walked through the different tents and seen how many people are there and who they are. So I'd like the information because I think it will help us plan better for right now, but also as we see maybe more ramifications from COVID and the economy throughout the year and continued growth in our population in general, it'd be helpful.
Thank you, Councilmember Byrd. Briefly before any of the executives respond, I wanted to see if Ann Beck, I don't know if you were indicating to raise your hand in response. I'd like to give.
Yeah, if possible.
Give her.
But I don't want to jump the line.
Well, I know that, yeah, time is limited, but I think the perspective would be valuable. So, yeah.
I just wanted to offer two things, if that's okay. I appreciate all the discussion. One of the things I want to remind everybody is that this is a regional problem as well. Our neighbors to the south don't have a shelter. And so I think it's not so much just looking at this group of folks who are at Camp 210, but that this is a much larger problem than just that. I want to remind folks that the city and county have worked to create a coordinated system to address the homelessness. And so there's the part of me that gets really anxious about the idea of setting up a table and talking to folks about where would you like to go when there is a long list. We're not called a list. There's a long, there's people who have submitted applications who are working with case managers who are doing, it's a bigger system than just this group. So I just want to remind folks as you have these conversations, it's not about just that. And we also have to remember that this is very much a regional problem. It's not just here. So, yeah.
Thank you. And just to confirm for the public record, I know it says Ann Deacon, that's Ann Beck, the Whatcom County Health Department. So next, Councilmember Knudsen, and then Huffman, Lilliquist, and Brown.
Thank you, Council President Stone. I want to take this opportunity and really thank the mayor and Sat Paul. Sat Paul, you are honest and a decent man, and I appreciate everything you just said when you started out today. You hit it right on the head. I too am becoming very frustrated at what I'm hearing out there. This constant diatribe that Bellingham and Whatcom County are not doing anything is absurd. It really hurts. And to our mayor and all that he's done and all that he's tolerated, I fully support him in saying that this tent encampment on City Hall has to end. It does have to end. And I really do believe that. We're hearing it from a lot of different people. It's not that I'm heartless or anybody else is heartless, but if it wasn't for COVID right now, we would not have a functional City Hall or a functional library. And that just cannot happen. It's not fair to the people that are out there, and it's not fair to the people that need to be going in and out of City Hall. I've heard today countless amounts of possibilities from the mayor for more capacity and from executives to do. It's out there. I think there's a lot of misinformation flying around out there. There's people telling people, no, nobody's going to leave that lawn until they get what they want. Well, you know, that's just not right at all. Everybody's trying to do everything they can. We've got so many different people working on that. Ann just said it. This isn't just a Bellingham problem. This isn't just a Whatcom County problem. You have Blaine, you have Linden, you have Everson, you have Nooksack, you have Sumas. We all have to be working on this issue. This is not just a Bellingham and Whatcom. It's not a Bellingham City Council and a Whatcom County Council problem. I applaud all that the Whatcom County Council has done. Look at the help we got. We wouldn't have base camp if it wasn't for Whatcom County. And I know a lot of people have a problem with the Lighthouse mission, but you know, the Lighthouse mission's been here almost 100 years helping people that don't have shelter. And I get pretty fed up with people yelling and screaming about not wanting to go over there and they're no good and just, you know, enough. But I think there's enough formula here for us to move forward and come up with solutions. But let me just be the first to rise up and say, this encampment on City Hall has to come to an end peacefully, orderly, respectably, and get those people housed somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Knudsen. Next, Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Council President Stone. Actually, what I have to say and the questions that I have are a lot along the lines of what Councilmember Byrd discussed. It's really difficult to figure out how to efficiently meet people's needs if you don't know what they are, or how many people you need to help. So I'm curious if there can be or is an effort jointly between all of the service providers and the camp volunteers to identify what really the needs of these people are and how we can most efficiently accommodate those needs for this short term. I mean, you know, when I talk longer term, that's a whole other fish to fry, but for this very short term problem, you know, I can see that base camp has been running at about room for about 50 people. Before the encampment, it was nearing capacity. So we can assume that some of those folks will be able and willing to go back to base camp. Some of them may not, a lot of them may not. And so it would be really great to know if we're to take any action, exactly what action we need to take in order to help people to know what their needs are. I want to hear more from the people who are camping at base camp themselves. And you know, we have a lot of service providers and case managers and folks that are very familiar with these people that are on the lawn. And I want to see a joint effort to care for those people, because all of these people do very much care for these people. So yeah, I'd like to know more about specifically the needs for this short-term situation.
Follow up.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Holly, you and I had discussed this issue last week, and I support your suggestion. It's along the lines of something that we wanted to do, which is identify the range of people in the community who provide services to these people and bring them together and have a conversation about engagement. And so I intend to do that. Clearly, that is going to be a critical piece of and strategy in the effort to end the encampment. And so I just wanted to follow up with that and let you know that we'll be organizing something. So thank you.
Councilmember Lillquist, and then we have Councilmember Brown and Anderson.
Thank you, Hannah. So I want to say something kind of difficult. So I want to start out by saying that I appreciate the attention that this issue is getting. But I think there's something kind of wrong about this meeting fundamentally, which is that councils are just simply the wrong entity to deal with immediate responses. We're policymaking and legislative bodies, not the executive. And the time to prevent people from being unsheltered in the winter is not today, but yesterday. And we have been working yesterday. You've heard the mayor talk about and other people talk about all the efforts been taking place over the years. Right now, thousands of people are getting housing assistance. Hundreds of new affordable housing units have been built. And I don't just mean shelter. I mean permanent supportive housing. I mean low-income housing. I mean reforms to criminal justice and to mental health system to prevent and reverse homelessness in the first place. The time to address this is to address the whole instance systemically. And that's what councils are better at doing, not at this immediate response. I stand behind everything that the mayor, not everything, I stand behind 99% everything the mayor is doing at the council and the county executive. When he's asked me for support or willingness to provide money, I've said yes, and I think everyone else has too. I'm behind the executive and the mayor because I think responding quickly and setting up programs is something that they're equipped to do, not a body that meets and gets together every 2 weeks. So I kind of fundamentally have a problem with this meeting. And we do have a problem. We have kind of two problems that look the same. One problem we have is that we have spent a great deal of time, money, and effort to create more shelter capacity in Whatcom County than ever before. And for over a month, we've had 50, 60, 70 unused, empty, warm beds people could have been staying in, and overflow capacity for 39 more. But that system hasn't been used. That's one problem. And then a related problem has to do with the ongoing work of the Homeless Strategies Work Group. We've identified part of that problem, where we've already said that the all-comers congregate facility simply is not appropriate or safe or welcoming for all people who are experiencing homelessness. We've come to recognize that we have populations of unsheltered people with particular and higher needs. Maybe they're elderly or medically fragile, maybe they're families with children. The Homeless Strategies Work Group has already been narrowing in on what those solutions for long-term increases in shelter capacity are. And that work is in that committee and hopefully in recommendations to these bodies, but it's not something the council does on the fly and sets up. The RFP right now that the city has already tentatively agreed with a provider to provide more shelter, that was put out on the street months ago, and it's going to take maybe a couple more weeks, even after the agreement, to get that out the door. Okay, that's how councils work. So I kind of disagree with the idea that we're going to solve something here. And as those of you in the council, you saw my email, and sorry for sending it out the way I did. I want to know what we're here to do. Okay, if there's an agreement, I want to hear it because I'm probably going to say yes. If there's a funding request, I'd like to hear it because I'm probably going to say yes. Right? If there's some new program that needs support, I'm probably going to say yes because I've done that. I've spearheaded budget amendments. I've voted for millions of dollars to be spent. I've personally volunteered to help homeless people and build tiny homes. I'm willing to do whatever it is. And I'd like to have there to be something here in this meeting because I'm probably going to say yes because we do have a problem. I kind of think I know what it is, but it really is in building long-term capacity in our shelter system that addresses the particular needs of the variety of people who are experiencing homelessness, because they are not all the same. They're individuals, they have life stories. So yes, I'm behind you, Seth. I'm behind you, Sat Paul. Tiny homes, get us through this winter. I've already said yes to that. If there's something more to say yes to, I'm probably going to say yes to that too. But I'd like us to get back, we the councils, to focusing on the long-term solutions and let our two executives work on the immediate solution. So I'm hope that was constructive. I'm not meaning to be a downer, but this is hurtful and frustrating to me and probably hurtful and frustrating you. It's certainly hurtful and frustrating to the advocates and to the people out there who are homeless themselves. So I hope that was constructive.
Thank you, Councilmember Lillquist. Just to respond briefly, I want to allow Councilmembers Brown and Anderson to speak, but then we'll circle back to your question. And really, the purpose of including and sending out to the councils copies of the ordinance and current code for Bellingham and ordinance for the county is that, as you've heard, one of the concerns is the individuals who would not be accepted at base camp for particular reasons, or would not be accepted to, the temporary encampments that are being run by Homes Now or other operators, right? And what we could do or would consider doing with respect to what they call no barrier or wet barrier shelters, right? What capacity do we have to open up and provide shelter for individuals who are, very high needs when you talk about support services and interventions. And again, just offering that option doesn't mean people are going to accept that option. It may not be what they're ready for, what they want. But I think that's the missing link when we're looking at base camp, not base camp, but Camp 210 right now. And the individuals who are camped out on the lawn is that the capacity that we've spoken to thus far is related to a certain low or medium barrier shelter that has some restrictions. So not to dominate that conversation too much at this point, but hoping to loop back to that in a moment. So Councilmember Brown and then Anderson.
Thank you. Sorry I couldn't attend earlier. I was the council's rep on the Swiss meeting for the 5 counties. I want to support what Mr. Knudsen said earlier and give my thanks to Sat Pal and Seth. If you read the social media, we have not done anything on homelessness ever. And I lived here for 26 years. That is simply not true. And it's simply not true that we're not doing it now. I like the idea of having an inventory on a regular basis as to what the barriers are to stop what the barriers are in the minds of the people in the camps from exiting homelessness. And they will change over time. Some of them are fairly well known, but they will change certainly for the individual. And it would be nice to know, because some of these problems, they're not housing problems first, they are some other underlying problem. And if there's an underlying problem we can address, then we want to be doing that. I think the other thing too that will frankly inform the community better is for us to publish a weekly inventory of space available at the mission, at the base camp, and at the tiny home villages. I mean, if you listen to social media, there isn't a bed to be had for anybody under any circumstances. And we know that's not true. And we have an obligation, I think, to the community to give that visibility of what space is available at those different facilities. And then the other point I wanted to make was that people are staying at the lawn of Bellingham because they're getting a need met that they're not getting met anywhere else. And I think in some cases that need that they're having met is that they're being able to camp in a group in a completely unregulated environment. And let's face it, we cannot replace that. We cannot provide services as government and provide people with a completely unregulated environment. It's just not going to happen, because we cannot be providing services for people who wish to engage in violent behavior without consequence. And if they've been trespassed from the other facilities because they wish to engage in violent behavior, we are not going to be able to provide them an alternative. It's as simple as that. And I'll finish with one last final thing. We have seen that there are several other communities in our region that are not providing services. We cannot ask our citizens to tax themselves to provide services that should be funded by the communities for which those people are coming from. That's just another harsh reality. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you for recognizing me. I use Zoom quite a bit, and I don't know if it's the way I came in or the update I ran last night with Zoom, but I do not have a raised hand function at all. But I do know where to look for it. It's just not there. So thank you for letting me do this for a while. I did want to thank Sat Paul early on, mentioning that the homeless problem is not a Bellingham problem. It is a problem in Bellingham. Or I should say a challenge in Bellingham. It is a community issue, and all of our cities in the county should bear some weight, and including those of adjoining counties, because we have the low barrier drop-in shelter. So we do get people who come in, and I've been looking at social media, and periodically there's interviews about people at 210, and they highlight where they've come from. Now, just because someone comes from another community or another state and they decide to make Bellingham home, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have a responsibility to try to provide all the services we can. But I don't think we're ever going to solve homelessness because it's epidemic nationwide. The best we can do is try to put measures in place that are going to help alleviate some of the disparity, improving our employment sector, improving the affordability of housing. Bellingham has been extremely generous as far as our community members voting for the housing levy. And as Michael has pointed out, we have hundreds of subsidized affordable housing that comes online in order to try to make sure that we can house individuals. We're creating methodology to help keep people in housing through providing direct assistance. So there, for the community who thinks we're not doing anything, we are. It's just very difficult to do enough when you have a lot of responsibilities citywide for services. And I also agree with Michael that we're legislative, and we look at how do we reduce the barriers. And Bellingham recently, did an analysis, and one of the barriers we reduced was to create a easier pathway for agencies to be able to utilize single family homes and multifamily homes and some of our transitional residency in order to provide housing and shelter. So it would have been very difficult and adversarial for a agency to be able to buy the house, you know, a block from me and be able to use that as a temporary shelter for individuals who were maybe leaving drug treatment, because that is things that people are concerned about maybe moving in next door. And we basically legislated the process to make that easier and less of a barrier and more predictability. I am hoping, and I know the city is spending a tremendous amount of time and staff resources working with 210, but I certainly hope that as things clear a little bit and we can start investing some of our attention, we will start expanding those opportunities for partnerships to be able to utilize some of these legislative things that we have done to try to increase more opportunities for different types of shelters. I totally agree having one shelter that could have 200 people, even though I'm thankful that they exist and that they are committed to those services. It's not necessarily the best facility for people, nor the best that we can do as a community. I think shelters throughout the community, and not just in Bellingham, it would be nice to see some of our other municipalities provide some sheltering options too. What I hope to gain, if not this meeting, but soon, I always look at what is the weather going to be doing. And if you look at the long range forecast, there's the possibility of snow at the end of the month. And I realize that the people at 210 are not the only people in Bellingham who are homeless and depending upon warming shelters. Back in September, I started asking at City Council, the mayor, what are we doing with the county so that we have emergency drop-in shelter? With the library being closed, with the coffee shops not being able to have people on the inside, our houseless community members don't have a place to go in during the daytime to warm up, dry off, and get out of this weather. And we've been so fortunate that we haven't hit too many freezing temperatures. Unfortunately, it's wet as a sponge out there, but there's a good chance we're going to get freezing temperatures with snow on the ground. And I want to hear from the county and the health department that if we don't have shelter at the lighthouse or the overflow location, what are we going to do as a community to open up and staff day warming shelters and perhaps evening shelters in the face of COVID? That's one of my biggest concerns right now. I mean, it's all a concern, but I'm really looking at the next couple of weeks. If the snow hits, what are we going to do? And what is the plan? And I haven't really been able to get, this is the location, this is what we're doing, and this will be the tipping criteria that we open these doors. And if that hasn't been determined, I would really appreciate hearing what those decisions will be within the next week before we are scrambling, which we scrambled a few years ago, where some of the county and city council members volunteered in order to be able to staff that location that wasn't too far from City Hall. So I don't want to be in that same position again.
Any response from Mayor Fleetwood or Executive Sadu? If not, I know that Ann Beck.
I think that last couple of weeks, I have explored that possibility that garden level center, that same location. The two things are there is, one is finding an operator or volunteers. Our volunteers are totally tired. They have been volunteering like nothing since March. This is now, normally what happens is when this kind of situation happens, people come out of the woodwork, say, hey, I can spend 2 nights, I can spend 4 days. Now these people, most of the volunteers, who were never even volunteers before ever, have worked for months together. Now we are doing not only testing and tracing contacts, now we are gearing up for vaccination. So I was not able to securely say from health department or anybody, hey, we can find 10 people for you. That was one thing. And second thing is COVID situation and the liability for that, and spaces where we can put 40 people, now we can put only 15. Right? And those are the two things I have confronted, looking for that, where we can just have a warm-up shelter. That's it. People can come, like that's what we did last time. You are allowed to come in at 5:30 or 5 o'clock, and you can leave at 6 a.m. in the morning. But you have a place to sleep and warm place and all this. We did that. So I'm running out of options or places, but we can find something. And I'm seriously looking for that. The biggest issue is volunteers or how to manage that. And I welcome any suggestions, any ideas to overcome that.
Thank you, Executive Sue. Ann, Beck, did you have any response? No.
I do, Lisa, I'm happy to send you the guiding assumptions. After that year, it was my first winter here too. And so we realized that there were different council members were looking at their apps on their phones, trying to figure out what the weather was going to be and what about this and what should we use. So the health department looked at it from a public health perspective and created guiding assumptions for temperature threshold, where to look for all that. So we have those written out. I know they're not everybody's favorite, but it's what we've got. A group came together to do that. And we were able to locate churches last year, organizations that were willing to step up and provide that extra layer of shelter. So that if our year-round shelters and the winter shelter that the Opportunity Council was running last year had capacity, we'd have extra spots for them if it hit those other thresholds. So we had that last year. The challenge is none of those operators were able to do it this year. The majority of their volunteers are within their congregations, and the churches themselves didn't feel comfortable hosting it. They didn't have enough volunteers within their congregation because of their age or other issues. So the pandemic does make it increasingly challenging to find that. We did go into it this year thinking that we would have at least more beds than we've had previously at the beginning, with the extra capacity at base camp, including us working with them to make sure COVID mitigation things were in place. And then the add-on with CTK over at the old space. And we were aware that there might come a point where you hit the 240 beds and they're out. And this is the hard thing to say, and there's so many people on here, and I say we're not going to always have the space for folks. And I don't like to admit that, but it's the case, no matter how many other layers we put on there. And so I am open to hearing more ideas. I am cautious though, from the public health perspective, of bringing people into a space and having them stay there if they're with the pandemic. We're going to ask volunteers or city or county staff to be manning that. And from what I've seen, we've had challenges around keeping distance and masks and things like that with folks. And so we don't want to create a space where COVID could become an issue as well. So that's part of my challenge around that.
Thank you, Ann. Quick question is whether any other council members other than Councilmember Byrd or Councilmember Anderson have anything to say. Councilmember, and then I'll loop back to them. Councilmember Kirchner.
Thanks, Councilmember Hannastone. I just wanted to say that I echo Councilmember Knudsen and Councilmember Brown's words in that the situation has gotten to the point where it's bordering on ridiculousness to have 200 tents in City Hall and in the public library. And it's putting staff in both the city and the county at risk, and anybody that needs to use the courthouse or the city hall. So I'll back them up and say this has to be solved and resolved. And I am now and have been a proponent for the pallet shelters for temporary housing in the winter. I have been and will be a proponent for changing code and making sure that the policies that we put in place do not harm future affordability for housing or or jobs in this community. We spend millions and millions of dollars on homelessness, on substance abuse, and mental health treatments. And, you know, it seems like there's just never enough. There's always more to do. And that just must be the nature of the beast. But, you know, I don't know, what do we find a place and we put up pallet shelters? Do we put 400 pallet shelters up somewhere, and then we're going to need 600 pallet shelters? You know, what we really need is workable solutions for the long term. And, you know, it came to mind during this meeting, because I'm kind of in the same boat Michael Lilliquist is in, is I'm not sure what the point of the meeting was. There was no agenda, there was no decision kind of matrix or anything. But I know the county funds Opportunity Council. I'm imagining the city put some money there too, to manage our homeless situation. There are homeless one-stop shopping. And so I don't know, they might have a representative on the call. I didn't recognize anybody there, but our you know, Opportunity Council should be also a partner in this with our administration on how to solve this problem. So I don't have any magic solution for this other than to continue to put policies in place that promote families, promote affordable housing, and promote employment in Whatcom County. But I'm here too, like Councilmember Lilliquist, to say what can we do and how can we do it, because the rest of the county, everybody else doesn't want to see this happening and is not you know, wants some action. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kirschner. So I see Councilmember Frazee has a new hand, and then I know that I have Councilmember Byrd, Anderson, and Brown. And so I want to make note. So we're at 4:15, and one of the pieces that so Chair Buchanan and I wanted to address today is that missing, right, that sector that I believe Councilmember Byrd, you know, spoke to earlier. So individuals, when we're talking about Camp 210 and the next steps and a transition to close Camp 210 and transition the individuals who are currently there into other housing locations, whether that be base camp or tiny homes at some of the newly the individuals who are not going to be accepted at any of those locations. One of the questions is for the city and county is, do we have the funding and the bandwidth, I guess, to support an encampment that would be a low or a no barrier or wet barrier shelter for individuals who have been banned from other locations or have extenuating circumstances? They're a registered sex offender. They have an outstanding criminal warrant. They've been trespassed. So I believe that within our existing regulations right now, there are safeguards that need to be put in place, which some operators are saying are very costly, right? When we talk about the support services necessary to support those individuals, the wraparound services at a location like that would be extensive, because we're seeing it play out on the lawn at City Hall, right? I mean, the concerns for public health and safety is growing exponentially every day. And so a lot of those individuals aren't going to be sent to Swift Haven or to an encampment opened up on Cornwall. And so what legislatively, what as councils are we able and or willing, to do? Is there something beyond what's currently in existence that needs to come to fruition to make that feasible? Or is it in existence in our ordinance and we need to, earmark funds to support the services that would keep residents at that type of camp safe? And so that's what we're hoping, or what I'm hoping to get some answers and direction from when we're thinking about the transition and ending of base camp, or I keep saying base camp, of Camp 210, is what happens, right, with that group. Because anecdotally, and missing the piece that Councilmember Byrd referenced of the head count and really knowing who's there and what their needs are. Without that, we know that there is a percentage of the individuals there who are not going to be, admitted other places. And so what are our options going forward? I see that Councilmember Anderson has withdrawn her hand. I have Councilmember Byrd and then Brown.
I think you missed Frazee.
Sorry, Councilmember Frazee first. Thank you, Councilmember Donovan.
Thank you. Just like Councilmember Anderson, I can't find the little hand. I don't know what happened there, but thank you, Councilmember Stone. And I wanted to go back to something, Councilmember Huffman said about finding out the real needs of the people that are at 210. And, are we in communication with the case managers that are there? And I know Mayor Fleetwood said that we're making sure before January 31st that each person is touched or working with a case manager. Are we sure that each person there does have a case manager? And if they do, I don't know if Ann Beck, if we are communicating with them, if we are bringing them as a group and seeing, like Councilmember Stone just said, the people who cannot stay at the existing sites, how many are there? Can we get the exact number? And what are their true needs? Are they a sex offender? Are they, if we could get the numbers, and then I think we need the knowledge first, because we need to know who's there. We need to know what the needs are. Why can't they stay at a different site? Is it, they've had issues at the Lighthouse Mission, but each individual, if it is 102 people, we do have time until January 31st to make sure each one is with their case manager, and we can connect with them either as a group or individually and see what that real need is. I think that's the important part, is finding all the pieces and the truth, and how many people are there in need that cannot go to the other sites that are available. And then we'll know what we can do for those individuals. And like Councilmember Lillquist, I would like to know, are we taking action today? What do you need from us? Thank you.
I don't know the response from that. After that, we had council members Byrd, Brown, Lillquist, and Vargas.
Thank you, Hannah. I'd like the data. I think it would be enormously helpful. At the same time, I don't necessarily want to spend a month collecting the data for another month while we collect the data. If we could start collecting it, and that's an ongoing process, and ideally a process that we put in place that's permanent, so that we could understand where people are coming from and how that needs increasing, or if those are individuals that have tried every service and continue to get kicked out because of behavior or something else, it'll allow us to understand and quantify that, and ideally better plan for longer term needs. But at the same time, we do have a short-term problem here. And that short-term problem is something that we've all looked at and at this point said, hey, there's reasons for it. We recognize that it exists. And whether it's because of COVID and the number of people we can put in place, or it's because of COVID and the number of individuals that any provider can service at their location, whatever it might be, there is a problem, and our service providers aren't able to cover everyone, it seems like. It would be nice for us to be, if we could come up with a solution that's temporary, that would help in these types of situations, that we could utilize every winter moving forward, so that we don't have to have this conversation every single year either, and that we could spool up or turn on in these situations where we need this emergency winter shelter, where it's close to freezing or below freezing. And it's not a matter of having an emergency meeting to discuss it and figure it out, but it's a matter of, hey, we can activate it, make it happen. And it's not dependent on a private organization such as Lighthouse. In my opinion, Hans and his team over there, they do a great job, just like our health department does, but they're a private organization. And whether their issues and the reason that they can't accept more people is because it's staff safety due to COVID, or it's because at 7 o'clock they have to stop testing due to the health department's restrictions, and they can't accept any new people after 7 o'clock that haven't been tested. Whatever it might be, there is a bottleneck there. I would propose the farmers market location. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's owned by the city, is my understanding. And I know that we lease that out currently to another organization, but you're talking about a glass structure with cement and steel. They could be pressure washed down at any given time. It has restrooms. It has a small cafeteria area that coffee could be served. And it could be used as a entry point for us to bring people in so they could stay warm and they have a location to go. They could be turned on in the winters, but also an ability to collect that data and get information on people that are coming into town or who are freshly homeless for one reason or another, and what the demand is moving forward and how that's evolving. So whether we could partner with the farmers market to facilitate that, or possibly give them some sort of grant or subsidy or discount their rent on that location for the 3 days a year or a week a year that we utilize it. It seems like an ideal spot for us, and especially as it's located next to all these other service providers like Opportunity Council and not too far from the health department. And there's not a lot of businesses around there that aren't nightclubs. And it gets used, what, 1 day a week in the winter? So during the day, I'd like to look at that, unless there's another situation or another location possible, or someone has another solution possible. But at the very least, having a warming center, I think, would be a huge move forward for us right now, knowing the obstacles that we're currently dealing with and what those restrictions look like. Is there any opposition to that idea? Or, I mean, is there anyone else in favor of looking into that?
Any replies to Councilmember Byrne? I see some thumbs up in consideration. I know that with the location of base camp in Bellingham City Center in downtown, additional locations in downtown, even under, you're saying under limited, circumstances, I agree with the benefits of the location. But I also am understanding the stress and strain placed on, our downtown businesses and residents as well. In the interest of time to round out these comments quickly, we have Councilmember Brown, Lillquist, Vargas, and then Anderson.
So I think we have to have a conversation with the community that we cannot fund a national problem with local tax revenues. That we have to prioritize who we're going to service. And I think there are certain people that we would all agree we would service automatically. If a pregnant woman turns up and says, I need housing, she's got it. If a child or youth turns up, they've got it. And I don't care where they come from. But where we've got adults that are coming into the community, we have to prioritize the people in this community first. If we provide unlimited services funded by local tax revenue, we will become overwhelmed and we will never meet the demand. So part of this discussion is going to have to be setting up a prioritization as to who we provide services to, along with the fact that we're going to have to say to them, this is what we can provide. If it's unsuitable for you, I'm sorry. This is what we have the capacity to provide.
Councilmember Lillquist, and then Vargas and Anderson.
So, Hannah, thank you for kind of clarifying your question. As I understand it now, the unanswered question, the unanswered need is, what about those people who won't be selected for current shelter options, who can't pass certain eligibility requirements? Is there something lower than the low barrier shelter? And by the way, the Homes Now model is not low barrier. Those are carefully selected people who want to live in community, which is one of the reasons why they work. For me, improvised tents on a lawn with hay spread around to prevent it from being so muddy, that is simply not acceptable. It's not safe housing, and it's particularly not safe in a time of COVID. For that matter, pallet homes, they're not really housing either. They're an acceptable winter stopgap measure that I endorse them. But to me, the key to all of our successful efforts is to recognize the wisdom that we were told years ago by experts in the field, which is that you will never get rid of the temporary state of homelessness, but you can prevent chronic homelessness. You can rehouse people. You can prevent it from being a a long-term problem by finding those people and putting them to an appropriate housing situation, a first rung, and for some people, a permanently supportive housing situation. So to me, the key is always services that go with housing. Services that go with the housing. For that housing to work, it has to be rung up, so it must be tied to services, recovery, and stability. And so when I hear your question, it's almost like you're saying, how do we feel about housing with no services? If that's where we're going, I can't do it. I can lower the barrier all the way practically to zero, but there's got to be services tied to it. It can't just be a place we put people and forget about them and let them dig themselves out of a hole. We've got to be helping them out of that hole. So again, I go back to long-term solutions. We need to increase the number of options and choices and capacity and the shelters that are available, and the need to address different populations' needs and individual situations. Number two, we need to increase capacity in the caregivers and the service providers. These people need to be trained, retained, and well compensated. We need to build all these providers we say we can't find. Let's spend next year creating them, saying we will fund your job, your career, your placement, because we will need you as much as a pallet home or a wall or a roof. So that's another long-term solution. And yeah, those are long-term solutions. Our goal really is to not prevent people from falling into homelessness, because there's misfortune and there always will be, but we can prevent it from being chronic. And we do that by providing a first good rung, and that rung always must have services. So you can maybe talk me into a low or no barrier shelter, but please tell me what services are going to be provided, because that's what I'm going to really need to see.
Councilmember Vargas.
I'm just going to focus on our immediate, which is our encampment at 210. And the thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again is a needs assessment for the population that is down there. I know when the encampment first started, we had requested that the HOT team, who both the county and the city fund, and it is their responsibility to reach out to people who are homeless, won't go down to 210 because of COVID and health concerns, which I totally understand. But I'm wondering if there is a way that the health department could actually help them with PPE, because I think without knowing exactly who our population is, what their different needs are, we won't be able to move everybody to proper locations. So I would like the number one focus to be a needs assessment and to know exactly who our population is down at the encampment, so we can help them and meet the end of January's date.
Thank you, Councilmember Vargas. So I'm going to go to Ann Beck and then Director Sepler.
Hey there. So thanks for one more quick second here. I just want to respond a little bit to the idea of the outreach and collecting that data at Camp 210. As somebody who's also worked on the COVID side of the house, it can be a bit challenging just because there are a lot of folks who are in transitional places. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're there. Being able to always identify everybody there and knowing they're going to be in that exact same spot the next day and then reconnecting with them has even been challenging as far as the COVID piece of it goes. The idea of, I talked with the HOT team a little bit about this because they hear that pressure as well. The HOT team, their job isn't to pull up and open up their trunk and be able to hand things out. It's not what there's designated in their contract. Theirs is a relationship building thing. And they do have a lot of relationships with folks who are in that camp. And they worked prior to the camp going to set up with base camp because they knew that would be the large congregate setting, to have an iPad and phone available so that they could communicate and meet their needs that way. And they have not been able to do that as much in a safe way because of that. So I think there's just kind of some challenges in putting this entire thing on HOT being the one to go do that. And they are still working with folks, and they're actively out there in other places working with folks who are experiencing homelessness. and they're connecting still. So I want to be cautious too about putting all of this on the OC. The OC has been an incredible partner in homelessness for a really long time. They were the ones that helped distribute the bulk of the rental assistance for folks during this last round of CARES funding. They are the ones that are, over 2,000 folks went through the coordinated entry system last year and were able to get with their housing needs met. It is a large spectrum that we're working with here with folks, and they have staff who are working that along the way. And they also have staff who are going through all the same things that we are, the challenges that everyone is experiencing with a pandemic happening. So we just need to be mindful that this isn't one agency's responsibility. It's not one 4 or 5 person team's responsibility, especially when a couple of them might not be totally comfortable engaging with folks just because of their own health issues. So I just want to be cautious about that and put that out there. I think that was it.
Thanks, Ann. Director Sepler.
Yes, and I'd like to follow Ann's good thoughts there. The city and the county fund the Homeless Service Center and the Coordinated Entry Program. 2,000 people went through it. Quite frankly, the very first and easiest question is to ask the organizers and advocates to survey their population, the folks they've invited to Camp 210, and ask them how many are in that system and how many are not. Because quite frankly, if they're in the system, we probably know the issues that are associated with them in housing. And if they're not, we should find out how to get them connected to the system. That seems to be the most expeditious way to address the quantitative issues you've all raised.
Thank you, Director Sepler. And so what I would like to know is from the council members who are present, I think we still have the full council on both sides. After that analysis, the assumption is that there will be, we don't know how large yet, but there will be individuals, right, who are currently unable to be placed in the existing systems that we have with respect to base camp and the encampments run by Homes Now and others. And so the question is there support? I know that Councilmember Brown was speaking to, priorities and several council members have mentioned that logistically, it's not feasible for us to serve everybody, and certainly not on an individualized basis. That's just the reality of the problem of that plagues us. And so the question is there support for a no barrier or wet barrier shelter that would require services, right? And so that's the heavy lift, is the cost of that, to provide the services that would be necessary to ensure the safety of the individuals who would be housed at such an encampment or location is extensive. And you don't know how many people would be, served by that. Right now we're talking, short-term solutions based on COVID and impending weather, right? These individuals who would be left out in the cold with nowhere to go. Is there political will here to move something like that forward or not? And the need for long-term solutions. But right now the cry is for immediate short-term solutions and where we go. So the question is this something that there's support to pursue? Because I expect that the county and city would need to partner to make something like that successful. And it would be something that we haven't taken on as of yet. And I know that there are other services in the community, right? You think about Grace and LEAD and different treatment programs. And so there are some services available in the community. And I think that's important to highlight. The reality is that individuals may not be at a place where they're ready to accept those services. And so some of that may be beyond, the city and county's reach. But Executive Sidhu.
Yeah, I think, Hannah, that's the right question. And I just want to say that definitely county would like to partner with city. And I'm looking at, we are in mid-January already. So to end of February, say February 28th, that then the weather turns as well, that we will make commitment. Now, another issue I want to share, which Ann has probably alluded to, and Beck, that we have a shortage of professionals as well, because we really have been thinking, and I've been talking, that maybe we should start some kind of ask Whatcom Community College to start a program where they can, on a crash basis, take some people who know that they can get a job and give them some 3-month, 4-month training, at least start with basics, which can lead to some kind of degree over time, but at least enable them so that we can say that these people have background to provide some kind of basic services. I can tell you that this is something which every county, every place is happening, and to find a CDHP or some other experts or trained people is not easy. But I think that I would like to commit that we will definitely look at what the cost is and participate in that. I think that is for short term. And long term, I think both councils need to make some decisions which are 3 to 5 year solutions. It's not, again, a 1-year solution. And we have been putting money into Opportunity Council, Cultural Land Trust, other kind of organizations. Yes, we can divert some of the money and find ways with the help from the council to find those kind of solutions. But I'm totally with it that we need to do something quick and from between now and end of February to take care of severe weather shelter and with some services. What happens beyond that, I don't think I can commit right now of amount of money and what it would take.
Mayor Fleetwood.
Well, yeah, there's a variety of things I want to touch on. First off, just as it relates to, I don't know what numbers you're contending, Councilmember Stone, is out there as it relates to that portion of people that will not be able to find shelter. I don't know what authority you cite when you assert that. It seems we have a little controversy as to who's saying what on that particular issue, because there are some providers who contend that the claim of barriers is actually less than it's being portrayed, that in fact there is a process by which people can get back into base camp, for instance. It's been contended by some that there's this enormous barrier there, and the people at base camp, and I know we don't like to make reference to base camp as a solution here, but the people that operate that talk about the methods by which people can in fact get back in, and that of all the people that are at City Hall, the number of people who have an outright barrier is actually very small. But having said that, I want to just underscore that our effort, as I said at the beginning, to set up an additional tent encampment in partnership with the site at the port and also with the county providing tiny homes is a low barrier site. And the way that we've identified being able to get around the fact that it's low barrier is by imposing some conditions that would help us mitigate some of the concerns we have about that. So that's a site that we're actively working on that is low barrier that could potentially house up to 25 people. And if I could, just to finish up on the idea around an inventory and getting people, that is one of the aspects, just to underscore that we are hoping to put together, piggybacking on what was suggested by Holly. We do hope to, in the very near term, contact and arrange a meeting potentially with many of the social service providers, the caseworkers who do historically have engagement with many of the people at City Hall. So we intend to do that and hopefully come up with some means by which we can engage people and re-engage people.
Councilmember Donovan. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm on this all day. I think I figured out. Thanks. I'm trying to focus in on what Councilmember Stone was asking us, and so am I understanding it as, do we have the will, political will, and financial capacity to do something in addition to the stuff that Mayor Fleetwood was talking about, and that the population we'd be talking about would probably be people who wouldn't be in these tiny homes, maybe our most challenging population. I'm just making sure I understand what your ask of us was. And my ability to answer that would be, well, we don't know how many that is, which the mayor just pointed out, but do we have the site and the staff to do that? And would this be like just a warming facility, or is it going to be something that would be fairly service intensive? And I'm open to any of those suggestions. I just want to get a sense of, like, is it just a temporary warming thing for a population that won't be able to go to base camp or to the tiny homes? Or is it that plus the kind of services that Councilmember Lilliquist is talking about? Because we're hearing in the community, like, we could just find an old big box store and open it up and volunteers can run it. And I don't really think that's feasible personally. So in my understanding, what is the ask for us here?
So certainly I agree that, the public health and safety concerns would not permit, I don't believe, the city or county partnering in something that just opened up a space without any, restrictions or guidelines or services being provided. I guess one point of clarification for the mayor and the executive is so the low barrier shelter that you speak of on Cornwall, is that a location that we think would serve individuals who would not be accepted to base camp or homes now, right? That would allow, which people, who that would be able to serve. And the question for Executive Stu, I guess, is, it wasn't clear in that commitment going forward if that's for a temporary warming shelter, just, if people needed to come in from weather for a couple of nights, or if it's something more long-term that would have, long-term and short-term perspective of, the winter months, but would have wraparound services available. And I see that Director Sepler came on as well. So I don't know if there's an order in which you all would like to address that.
Let me go ahead, Mayor.
Oh, I was just going to say, to answer your initial question, that yes, the Cornwall site would be a place that we believe would house people that would not otherwise be eligible at places such as Homes Now, which I think I'm accurate in characterizing as a moderate barrier shelter. Rick?
If I might, what we're talking about is, will we create a facility that would allow drug and alcohol use that is funded by the city and the county? And the answer is, our enabling ordinance says you shouldn't do that, but it does have a provision that with adequate mitigation, with the adequate staffing, with people with experience working with those who are chronically unsheltered and this population, we can reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So the bottom line is, yes, we could do it. It could be conditioned to occur, and we could reduce the risk to an acceptable level. But typically those interventions tend to be somewhat costly compared to staffing moderately barrier facilities.
Yeah. As long as I was talking about from now to the end of February was a warm-up shelter with minimal services. Of course, we have to have a management, all this, but that is a humane thing to do. And as a minimum, that will be in a Mr. Sepler just described. So there are people who are not in that category who can actually have a warm-up shelter. So there are options for short-term. Use the capacity at the base camp, use the capacity at the low barrier shelter or moderate barrier shelter. And the third would be that we open up a place which is a warm-up shelter. I think that's the easiest thing we can do for next 35, 40 days. And then let's work through the whole year. What are the long-term solutions, which most of the council members have expressed. I don't need to repeat that.
And so I just, in response to that, want to be clear then, because that wasn't clear earlier. I think that the site on Cornwall could potentially be, serving individuals who were of higher, needs for intervention and services. And so the question is to meet those needs, whether there's anything hindering that from moving forward that's needed, that requires action by the councils, That's one, with respect to our existing ordinances. It sounds like from Director Sepler, there's not. And whether or not there is, funding available now to help bring that to fruition. Councilmember Buchanan and Chair.
Yes, thank you, President Hannah Stone. I got a question for Mr. Sepler. Mr. Sepler, you just kind of described the ordinances as being there's somewhat flexibility in those, but you also talked about conditions could be made. Would those conditions be something that would require council action?
No, the authority is established in the ordinances at 2015-030P in our code that allows the director to deal with folks who have lesser qualifications, and at 2015-080D under standards to waive the standard or modify the standard as long as the public safety, health and safety is protected. In doing so, we rely on, I would rely on over 30 years of doing mitigations. I'd reach out to those with expertise in the field to ensure what the minimal acceptable level would be, to ensure a safe environment for both the residents of the encampment as well as the surrounding community. And that's where the conditions would come from. They're certainly not arbitrary. All we're doing is trying to find that right level of service to match the population. If you're going to allow drug and alcohol use on site, that is an accelerant to behaviors and in close proximity. Remember, when folks are camping in the woods, often the encampments are spread out and dispersed. Now we're bringing a bunch of people together and we have a risk. We can mitigate that risk successfully. Others have done it by getting good protocols, training volunteers, establishing standards, ensuring there's controlled access, and folks could be able to attend with less barriers.
Thank you, Director Sepler. Councilmember Byrd.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm not necessarily, I don't have interest in creating a facility or a shelter that's going to have people who are actively doing drugs or participating on site in that kind of situation. That's not at all kind of what I'm looking for. And when I look at what I hear from the people over there at 210, they're going around, and while we have a bunch of people there that have previously had the substance abuse disorder, while they're at that location, they've been cleaned and they've been able to manage a clean location. So to me, that says that there's a desire within that body, if we could supply at least a warming shelter or someplace for them to go, that they're willing to take that step forward of not doing drugs and make that commitment to it. And I think that, especially based on what Mr. Sepler just spoke to, is necessary. I mean, there should be, some small steps forward with everything that we do. And it should be a process that we're creating, and we're really focusing on throughput of people moving from homelessness into permanent sustainability or some sort of more permanent solution in the long run. For the short term, I understand that maybe the farmer's market location as a warming shelter isn't ideal for whatever reason that might be. But I do think we need to find some first step forward as a group here. And I was hoping that that's what this meeting was today. And the simplest version of that seems like it would be a warming shelter. And so in lieu of not allowing the farmer's market or utilizing that facility, I tend to kind of pivot back to what other options and resources do we have available. And I think about all of the restaurants and the nightclubs and the office or real estate owners of real estate in town that are having a hard time right now, that are either permanently closed down or temporarily closed down or have no ability to fill a warehouse or an office building or a facility. Can we create a program where we could partner with them and essentially somehow compensate them in order to open those doors and utilize their private locations for a warming shelter? It seems like that could be a win-win, in which we're accessing private resources that wouldn't otherwise be available, and we're helping to keep them in business as we kind of move through these hard times. Thoughts on that? Is that something that the joint councils would consider moving forward with?
I don't know if Executive Sadhu had, if there were other locations that had been explored or responses to Councilmember.
Let's hear from Ben and Kathy as well. They raised their hands.
Yep.
And let's continue to listen.
And then I wanted, so Councilmember Frazee, I had seen your hand late. Since Councilmember Ellen Voss has not spoken yet, I was going to let him go first, and then I'll come back to you. Councilmember Ellen Voss.
I'm going to stop my video real quick so maybe you guys can hear me, because I tend to go Darth Vader with my rural internet.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and choose my words very very carefully so I don't offend anyone. But I think we serve our constituents better if we could just use plain language instead of the low barrier blah 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 that the average individual who's watching this video or who may watch it later or read a quote in the newspaper. I wish we could just call it what it is and say that we're going to allow drug use in a taxpayer funded facility. And so I think that would behoove us if we could be real about the situation that we're talking about and speak in plain speak. And quite frankly, maybe we don't do it because it offends people, but honestly, maybe we should be offended every once in a while. Because then this type of situation might get the attention that it deserves all the time instead of the attention that it's getting because the folks camping at 210 are all up in our face right now. We'll pause a minute while my granddaughter runs by. I hear a lot of people beating around the bush to what I'm thinking, and that is until we get real and address the real problem, we're just going to be putting a Band-Aid on things. And maybe that's all we have the funding for right now is putting a Band-Aid on things. I hear the narrative that we're not doing enough. However, when I'm seeing the budgets that are going out and I'm seeing the occupancies that are available, I see that right now we're doing more than we've ever done. And so I would really appreciate it if we could talk about that a little bit too. And I'm not talking to you council members, I'm talking to probably the people that are driving the conversation in the community. Let's be real about what we're actually doing. And we are doing more now than we have ever done. And I would appreciate it if that would be acknowledged. For Seth, Paul, for Seth, for all of us here, we are doing more now than we ever have done. And I think we would all like to do more than what we're doing to solve the problem. But I truly feel that until we have the courage to address the issues that are really there instead of talking about it in this fluffy terms and this, that, and the other thing, we'll never get there. We'll just keep putting Band-Aids on it. So I'm a father, right? And I'm sure you guys are all parents as well. And when I think about things, I usually think about it in terms of how would I address this situation on a personal level. And I'm sorry, but on a personal level, I would never allow my children to not have any skin in the game in any situation. And so when I think about providing tax dollars to help these people, I can't even go there unless I know. I'll put it like this. When I hear people calling for volunteers to help clean up after the campers, because we can't even put that baseline expectation on them to clean up after themselves, I'm going, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense to me. So in my opinion, I am more than willing to vote for things and put forth, a substantial amount of budget, as long as we're willing to address the real issues, the elephant in the room, put people in place that are going to make sure that these folks, now maybe they can't pay in currency tax dollars like the rest of us are paying in currency tax dollars. But these folks we need to have some form of it shouldn't be that there is zero expectation, because in return we will get zero in return if we don't have some form of expectation. I've always found that people perform to the expectation that we put on them. And if we don't even have the expectation that they're going to clean up after themselves, how do we ever expect for them to turn their life around or get to a spot where they can have a clear enough head to seek the help that they need to be functional in our society? And so when we get a plan in place like that, I mean, I have to take a drug test to have the honor of paying my taxes. And so I don't think it's too much to ask. I'm not saying that these folks have to be clean. I mean, that's part of why they're where they're at. That, mental illness, and a few other things are why they're where they're at. But why can we not have the expectation that they're at least taking the steps to earn their way up to something better? And when we have a plan like that, then I'm going to be all for it. But I would appreciate in the future if we could speak real language so that the folks that are listening understand what we're talking about. And what I've heard over the last 5 or 10 minutes is that we are talking about putting together an area where these people can do things that the average citizen can't do with your taxpayers' dollars. So that let's not sugarcoat things, and let's talk about the real issues. And when we're able to do that, I think we'll move closer to being able to solve these problems. I'll get off my soapbox now. Thanks. You better let Todd Donovan talk, because I'm sure he'll want to counter everything I just said.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellenboss. And to speak to the numbers, so last January, January of 2020, we had 280 emergency beds available. And as of January 2021, we have 400 emergency beds with Swift Haven now online. So that's a significant increase when we talk about what has been done. And so, and I will go to Councilmember Frazee, but I just wanted to, and I know that we are at time now. So in thinking about Camp 210 and that encampment basically being closed, right? When we close encampments, is having the discussion today to figure out, are there missing pieces and things that we, need to do, or is the capacity there, and are the options available in order to move forward with that transition? And I believe we've received the answers we need, but I'll go to Councilmember Frazee next.
I just want to say I am in support of a warming shelter like we had in 2019. I don't want us, I don't think we did a good job running it when we're trying to make decisions and also staying up all night. So I'm in support of a warming shelter. I think that would be good throughout the winter. I'm still trying to wrap my head. I believe Mr. Sempler said that, and from Ben's, what he had said, that there would be drug and alcohols allowed on the premise. And right now I can't wrap my head around that. I don't see that as an option. When the people would come into the warming center in the evenings, the 2 weeks that we had that, we just asked them to give us their weapons, and they would. It was pretty amazing that they would just do that in order to lie on the ground and sleep. And so I am in support of the warming center. I also want the public to know that, tomorrow I'm looking at our agenda here, and we're amending amounts, to Lydia Place, to Opportunity Council, to Northwest Youth Services, $3-4 million. So we are putting money into these programs, and we are trying to help people with these case management and offering services. So we are doing a lot. And like I said, I really can't wrap my head around allowing people to come into something that's supported by our tax money, where it's a free-for-all. But maybe I haven't seen something that works. If people can send me articles or something that there's a program that works and helps people and gets them into homes after they're in one of these programs, I would support it totally. But for now, I support providing money for a warming shelter just in the evenings.
Thank you, Councilmember Frazee. And I'll go to Councilmember Brown. Just for a point of clarification, I want to be very clear that, so what Director Sepler was speaking to when we talked about a low barrier shelter or a place, you know, they've been called wet shelters where someone's able to be using while they're staying there, right? That would be an encampment where someone's living from day to day. They're not there for a warming shelter for a couple of nights. And in that capacity, having wraparound services, right, that would help those people, the people who are staying there to obtain services and transition, right, forward along a healthy path. So that is separate from a warming shelter. I don't believe anybody is proposing having a warming shelter that would allow individuals to have, you know, weapons or be consuming alcohol or drugs on site. So just be very clear that those are separate. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that that's clear for council members as well as the public. And we are at 5:05. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I don't want us to be saying that a condition for getting any services is that you have to be clean or sober, because the reality is a person who's not clean and sober is usually trying to self-medicate themselves because of some issue that they frankly need other services for. So the barrier to me is you cannot engage in violence. The barrier to me is you cannot actively use drugs and alcohol on the premises, but I don't have an expectation that you're clean and sober to actually enter them.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. So in closing, a couple of follow-up questions, or I guess requests for our executives based on the conversation today. One is the time frame for being able to have a head count or inventory, right, of Camp 210 to be able to know if there's more that needs to be done. Because at this point, it sounds as though capacity has increased and there are options available, including the, you know, opening of a site on Cornwall that would expand beyond, you know, who's eligible to enter, like at base camp or the Swift Haven. It sounds like that capacity is growing. So it's a question about that inventory based on the lawn, and then the warming shelter that's been spoken of, when we can have an update on that, and if there are missing pieces that we need before that comes online.
Let me answer that. Starting tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we can start filling up base camp, and we can fill up the 39 places in drop-in center. Then we should take an inventory, how many people are remaining and need help. I think that for us speculating that we go create another 100 people warm-up shelter when we have it available. I think it has to be done systemically. We should fill up what we have within the next 3 days, and then take the inventory. Then we should fill up, okay, how many people can go into that low barrier, whatever barrier shelter we are talking about. 25 people there. There are about 75 to 100 people who can go to base camp. Then we should look at, okay, how many people are remaining? 20, 10, 50? We will make arrangements for that. I'm not going to go and start arranging for 150 people warm-up shelter, just speculating that all these people at the 210 camp, I need to accommodate that. We have something already. Let's fill that up. Let's fill that up starting tomorrow morning. There is no barrier to that. You know, I think everybody has to take responsibility. The people who are organizing, it is not only homeless or winter shelter, it is a protest. It is a protest. We must stop that. We should see, okay, this is what we can do, which is possible, it's available. Then we should do an inventory, what is remaining, and we will make our utmost best and quickest to find the place for the rest of the people. I don't know where and how, but darn, we'll work hard to get that. That's my challenge to everybody, and council, as well as the organizers, as well as everybody who are listening. Please cooperate. Please help us solve this issue. We do not want those people in the tent as much you don't want. We don't like that They are sleeping in tent and it's cold, it's winter, it's wet, and there may be snow. Let's utilize what we have as a community. It's a common resource. We have put in tax money into that facility. Why are not we using it? So beyond that, then we take an inventory, what is remaining, and then we should do that. At least that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Executive Sadu. Any final thoughts, Mayor Fleetwood?
Simply that I appreciate the range of perspectives that have been expressed today. It's an emotionally charged, complicated, challenging issue that we're facing, and we're working on it. We've been actively engaged every single day since this encampment began. Appreciate Executive Sadu's comment just now. There is a formal warming shelter. It has been identified as base camp. There is availability there, and people can go over. And as was indicated at the Homeless Strategies Work Group meeting just a few days ago, there is a process, an expedited process by which people can go in. So if there is a place that people can go and warm up, certainly support the executive and the effort to continue the effort to find out what kind of warming shelter is needed. I see broad support for that notion. Challenging as everything is right now. I question whether there's private businesses available that we could utilize. It's been indicated that, as is so often the problem or the challenge with all of this, it's finding operators to manage. But I'll certainly support additional creative effort towards that end. Meanwhile, we'll just continue on with the basics, which is continuing to work on increasing capacity and preparing for the process by which we can end the encampment at City Hall. I thank all of you for your participation.
Thank you, Mayor Fleetwood. I want to echo just appreciation for all of you taking time to be here today. I appreciate the fact that, some council members may feel frustrated that we didn't take any formal, action today. I think there is value in a sort of point in time conversation by all of us collectively to make sure that we're all on the same page when engaging with the community, that we know where we're at and what our capacity is and what our next steps are, to make sure that, we don't get divided on interpretation of facts and when, different individuals may, have different points of view and different interests and motives. And so wanting to make sure that we're all sort of working from the same set of facts, that we're able to have a candid conversation today and ask those questions to find out where we're at and what we're looking towards in the future. So there will obviously be follow-up, and I know that we have a meeting this evening. So I want to make sure that our council has time for dinner before we take up a meeting later this evening. But I just want to extend my appreciation and let you know that there will certainly be follow-up going forward. But thank you very much, and everybody stay safe.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.